Hi, everyone. Welcome to the session today. My name is Ryan, and I'm a peer career advisor at the Career Lab. And I'm joined with Katie, a fellow PCA. Um, and we're very excited to see everyone here today. Thank you so much for dropping by. We really appreciate it. A few notes before we get started. This session is being recorded, so please anonymize yourself accordingly, whether it's your name, keeping yourself um, on mute and keeping your video off to the most of your comfort. Any questions, please feel free to send them either to myself or to Katie in the chat, and we'll do our best to answer them at the very end or if they're relevant throughout the presentation. And after the presentation, if you have any questions about resumes, feel free to reach out to the Career Lab at careerlab@brown.edu or the peer career advisors at peercareeradvisors@brown.edu. This workshop is so important, because resume writing is really stressful and anxiety inducing for a lot of people. And our goal here today is to kind of demystify a lot of that and make resume writing a little bit simpler and less intimidating. So with that being said, let's get into it. So what even is a resume? So the slides really speak for themselves throughout this presentation, and we're going to do our best to make sure that you get access to those slides. But a resume is really a document that is sent in with a job application and is meant to show more about your academic and professional experience. It's meant to tell a little bit of a story about who you are to the employer, and specifically, it's supposed to say why you're a good candidate for the position. It's such an important thing because it's one of the most important things. It's a recap of all the most important things that you've done. And here it says, while it can be part of an application, the resume itself is an application. And what this really means is that it can be on its own a really important document, and oftentimes is the only piece that you're submitting to an application. So it's a really important piece of your professional toolkit almost. And so that's why this is such, I'm so glad to see so many people show up for this presentation, because it's something really important for your professional education. So slide number 3, what should it achieve? So like I mentioned earlier, the resume should cover 2 main areas. So here we have soft skills, where you're describing your past experiences, you're highlighting your most relevant work that you've done, and you're showing that through the description of experiences you've held and work that you've done. I'm talking in very vague terms because this is a nearly theoretical concept, but we'll get into the nitty-gritty later in the presentation. The other thing that we can provide on a resume are hard skills. And these hard skills are kind of listed at the end and convey technical experience that you have. And a good example of that is like coding experience or coding languages, something like that. What the most important part about a resume is that it's readable. You need to be able to convey all of this information in a brief glance. And the reason why is because employers will typically spend about 15 seconds looking at a resume before they decide whether or not they want to keep reading or to give you an interview. And so that's a really short amount of time. And so we want to make the resume as digestible as possible. And so we have some great techniques and tips throughout the resume or throughout the presentation that we can share with you to do so. I see Milas has their hand raised, and I want to unmute and ask if you have a question. Maybe not. Okay, no worries. And I know that I talk fast. I did just have an iced coffee. So if I need to slow down, please send in the chat and let me know. This stuff up front, like I did briefly mention, is is theoretical and a little bit abstract. So we're going to get into some of the more technical items that you can implement here in this next part of the presentation. So some guiding principles. These are basic guidelines, like I was just saying, that you can actually implement within your own resume. Formatting tips. Now, I'm a stickler for formatting. I love formatting resumes. It's one of my favorite things I learned how to do. Um, and so here are some of the main tips that we really emphasize. So it should be one page only. That's a little bit different than maybe what a lot of people are used to coming into college. I know a lot of times that college application resumes look a little bit longer than one page, but at this stage in our professional career, students will usually have one-page resumes only. And those pages look like, have margins anywhere between 1/2 to 1 inches long, or 1 inches wide. And font should be about 10 to 12 size font. Um, some good choices are listed here. The most important part with your font choice is that it needs to be universal between PC and Mac. And also another good tip is that after you've formatted a resume, you should save and submit it as a PDF as opposed to a Word document so that none of the formatting changes and gets messed up through going through the portal, anything like that that you're applying with. And then lastly, the most confusing part about resume formatting is reverse chronology, which reverse chronology basically means the thing that is at the first on the list of your resume is the most recent thing that you've done. And I'm going to invite Katie to come and give us a little bit of information about formatting.
So, well, I have a question for you, Ryan, about
Yeah.
formatting. So I know at Career Lab, we'll sometimes see resumes that play around a lot with fonts and formatting that use so many typical formatting. And what's your recommendation on doing that?
On a little bit more of alternative formatting. I think that there are scenarios in which it's really beneficial. If you're going for something a little bit more creative and non-traditional, going through a more artistic and, like I said, creative background and into an industry that really responds to that individuality, I say that doing more non-traditional formatting could really benefit you. On the other hand, if you're like right now, I know consulting recruiting is on the tip of everyone's tongues. They really respond to very traditional formatting. So I think that before deciding whether or not you want to do a more alternative route, really consider what industry you're applying to. And then what I recommend is honestly running it through another set of eyes, like a peer career advisors, to make sure that that information is still coming across well. And then I have another question, and I don't want to take all the questions up front, but this one is really poignant. What reasons might there be for students to have a resume that's more than one page? So at this current stage, you should not have a resume that's more than one page. Exceptions to that are if you have a CV, and a real CV, not an American CV, because Americans don't know the difference between CVs and resumes. That is when you're applying to grad school. A lot of the times STEM grad schools ask for CVs, which are more than one page long. But that is a little bit tangential and not really what we give as universal information to students. But great question, thank you for that. I'm gonna keep going. What should I put on my resume? This is a question that comes on a lot and is really hard and easy to answer. So what should go on the resume is really what's the most relevant to the job that you're applying for. What are the things that you really need them to know that you've done that make them think that you're a great candidate? But what those things are really up to you and depend on your experience. So here is a list of things that you could think about putting on your resume. However, this is not a checklist. Don't think that you have to put one of these on in order to be considered for a position. It really needs to, this slide right here is really all about your experience and thinking about brainstorming, what of these things have I done that really translate well to the position that I'm applying for. But these are the things that we're looking for you to write about on your resume. Now we're getting to the technical stuff. So this is the header. This is, the objective here is to tell the employer who you are and how to contact you. So things that should definitely be on here are your full name, and your preferred name is preferred, and great contact information from you, so your email address and phone number. We recommend putting on your brown.edu email just so that it kind of proves that you're actually a Brown student. And some optional things that you can include are a mail address or a LinkedIn, personal website, social media that is relevant to the work that you're applying for. So if you have um, prior experience creating websites and have a personal website of your own, include that link on your resume. And then some formatting tips for the header specifically. It should be the largest thing on the page. So your name should be really, really large. 20-point font is really, really large and is usually going to be centered. This header is going to be the same for your resume as for your cover letter. And stay tuned for the cover letter presentation, which is coming up later this week, if not next week. But yeah, very straightforward. Here's an example. And don't mind the education bit. We're going to get into that in a sec. But here we have the name up in really large font, mailing address, phone number, email, great ways to know how to contact this individual. This is a great example. It's very straightforward as well. It's not too complicated or convoluted to get into. Now we're going to get into education, which increases the complexity just a little bit. And what it's meant to do is showcase what you're studying, how well you're doing, and specific courses that you've taken. And so the thing that's going to be at the top, usually, the thing that's going to be at the top of your education section is the Brown entry. So the work that you've done while at Brown. So what that's going to include is information about your concentration, oftentimes your GPA and coursework. If you haven't declared your concentration yet, it does not matter. Don't stress. Just put what you think is the best option for you, what you're really considering. And if that changes, change it. It's no big deal. Your GPA, we have to calculate ourselves. So A's are 4.0, B's 3.0, C's 2.0. Don't count S and C or NCs when you're calculating your GPA. And if you're not comfortable putting your GPA on your resume, just don't. It's really no big deal. And you can provide it later if the employer asks for it. But if they ask for it, they're going to ask for your whole transcript, so it doesn't matter, usually. And then the last thing I wanted to talk, or last two things I want to talk about are coursework. So this is really relevant in specific industries, like if you're going into like software engineering or coding of any kind. A lot of firms actually know the curriculum, and so putting that on your resume is really important. And also if you're going into like a very specific field and you've taken a course, that's exactly what this position is about, included on the resume. And so that's a great point to talk about there. And SAT, ACT, include it if the employer asks for it, but you definitely don't need to include it on your resume if you don't want to. And then later I'm going to explain what the left and right here means, because it's a little not obvious, but it has to do with formatting. And so the other thing that might show up on your education section is your high school entry. You can definitely take this out if you don't have space for it anymore. If you're fighting for space, it would be one of the first things that I, as a peer career advisor, would suggest that you remove from your resume, just because it's not as relevant anymore now that you have college experience. But it could be really beneficial if it's a really well-known high school or it has potential recognition opportunities for you. And so there are situations in which you might consider keeping high school on your resume. If you do decide to keep high school on your resume, you should keep your name, GPA, and the type of GPA that you received while in high school, any honors, scholarships, awards, activities that you did in high school that you're not mentioning in your resume that you want to include. And then of course, some formatting details about location and graduation date. And an example of this is right here. As you can see, we have education highlighted, Brown University with information about the concentrations and GPA, as well as over here, what the other slides refer to as right, has Providence, Rhode Island, expected graduation up against the right margin, and then courses, and then you can also see how they formatted the high school experience. If you're having trouble formatting, there's a great template on the Career Lab website that I will go grab now and put into the chat. But while I'm doing that, I'm going to hand it over to Katie to talk about skills and interests.
All right, well, skills and interests. Actually, should I switch over and start sharing on my screen instead? Would that be easier? Oh wait, Ryan, you're muted.
I can keep clicking for you if you'd like, or you can
Okay, that
share.
works too. All
All right.
right, so skills and interests brings us to the bottom of your resume. This is another section, like your education section, that helps show off your technical and language skills and can often times be a place where employers will formulate questions. They'll look at the bottom of your resume, see what skills you have, see what interests you have, and start like coming up with questions for you. So to start off with skills, start off by listing your hard skills, which can be, oh wait, Ryan, we can see your screen, which can be your technical / computer skills. So things like Microsoft Office, it's generally assumed, but you can list it. Adobe program, just stuff in general. Lab skills, if you're applying to a laboratory research position, programming languages, design skills, stuff like that. We never say to include soft skills. I know that, sometimes some resume templates that you can find online will have an area for soft skills, but instead it's better to just show off your soft skills through your experiences and through the other stuff listed on your resume. If you have something like team leadership or communication skills, those are all soft skills that are great to have, but show them off in your past experiences and how you describe the stuff you've done before. Just going back, we have 2 questions in the chat. S&Cs count in the GPA if you get an A, not if it's S&C. It doesn't count towards your ground GPA. For listing college courses, you can include the name of the course because that's more contextual than saying, math 100. Instead, you could say calculus. All right, to go back to this, to the next slide in skills and interests. In addition to listing your hard skills, it's great to list any languages, any foreign languages you speak. You don't have to include English if your resume is in English. If your resume is in another language, then you can list English. And then just list your proficiency. So, elementary proficiency, native proficiency, stuff like that. And the big thing with both hard skills and with languages is that you never want to exaggerate. Feel free to list it if you're comfortable, both describing your familiarity and background with it, but never include something that if you're asked about it, you'd choke up in a resume. Instead, be prepared to demonstrate anything that you list in your resume in an interview, especially your hard skills and your languages. And the last part of your skills and interests section are your interests. I had a question, what if English is your foreign language? If your resume is in English, then it's assumed that you're, you have good working proficiency in English. But like I said, if your resume is in another language, then you can list English as a language that you have proficiency in. All right, going on to interests, which is the next slide. A lot of times, like I'll see a lot of resumes that don't include interests because there's something that's can seem tangential to your professional development. A lot of times, there's something that people will take off if they're running out of space because they don't think it's necessary. But instead, like it is a good thing to include. The last bullet point talks about, how if you and your interviewer share a common interest, this can be a great conversation starter that can show off your personality. It can show off your conversation skills. Anecdotally, I've heard other PCA who had an experience where she listed Beyonce under her interests, and it came up in an interview where the employer was like, "Oh, so you say that one of your interests is Beyonce? Like, what does that mean?" And she entirely lit up when she talked about how much she loved Beyonce, how it was both her music and her performance, and what she meant to her. And because she lit up and because she just demonstrated so much genuine interest in it, it helped her get the position, and it was something that she loved to talk about. So if you have something like Beyonce, list that. Could also list things like cooking or surfing. I have food documentaries on mine. If someone asked me about food documentaries, I would love to go on about it forever. So don't pass over interest. If you're thinking about keeping it off, always include it if you have space. These slides, I think Ryan's going to try and get them to you guys after this. So going on to the next slide. So here's an example of how you could format your skills and interests. So here, this person has their languages. So like I was asked before, if your native language is not English, you can, list your native language. with this example, I wouldn't list English because your resume is in English. It's assumed that you have good working proficiency in it. And then this person has French because they explain the proficiency there. They list their technical skills, and then they list their interests. And assume that these are all really cool things that if they're asked about it by an employer in an interview, they'd love to talk about it. So yeah, here you have 2 examples. But don't feel, if you're like, oh, my interest is cooking, like don't feel you have to find something that's super, super niche. These are all really cool and somewhat niche. Feel free to just list anything that you're passionate about. All right, so after you're done with your skills and interests, here's the big section, your body section, which organizes your past professional experiences into 1 to 3 sections, and they're typed by either role type, skills, or industry. You have a lot of flexibility with this, with how you group your past experiences, and if you do it effectively, then you can really, really, really like highlight and emphasize your most relevant experiences in a way that like emphasizes how prepared you are for this position that you're applying for. So to go on to the next slide. So each one of your experiences are grouped into these sections, which, starts off with section header. And then we'll have, under that header, you'll have 1 or, to multiple entries that describes the experience by the location, your role in it, and then breaks it down into a couple bullet points to describe your accomplishments within that position. And then you'll include the location and the time that you did it. So to go on to the next slide to explain this further. So section headers are labels that indicate either the type of industry experience or the skills that you have. So in this past, in the previous slide, the section was broken down. It was the leadership section. So in that section, they're grouped by skill versus, if you want to group it by industry type, then this could be marketing experience, education experience, software engineering experience. But instead, you want to do that instead of doing say paid work experience or internship experience or volunteer experience, because while, it's good to show that you have paid work experience, it doesn't say as much if you say instead software engineering experience. And then if you say software engineering experience, you can include both your software engineering internships and then, your role in a software engineering club on campus. So it shows that not only do you have relevant paid work experience there, but you have a lot of other experiences that wouldn't be necessarily grouped with it. But, if you group it all together, you can list it first in your resume and highlight the most relevant experiences rather than the ones that, you were paid for versus not paid for. So, in doing so, it's indicative of what you've accomplished, but also shows what you're aiming for. By, describing it by the industry type, it shows that you're, searching for experience in this industry, that you have some relevant experience, but you're looking for more. And ultimately, in doing so as well, you're able to group the most relevant experiences first. So when the employer goes through it, the first thing that they see is that, oh, you have super relevant software engineering experience, instead of having to go through and you see your internship experience, and then there's one that's super relevant and a couple that aren't. And then your club experience, there's one that's super relevant and a couple that aren't. Instead, all the super relevant ones are the first thing they see. All right, so after section headers, you want to go through and format each entry in a way that's consistent. This is another formatting thing. Consistency is key. You have some flexibility in how you do this, but ultimately you want each one to look similar so it's easy to read and very clean and well organized. So, you want to use reverse chronological order for each one of your entries, which means that you have your most recent experience first, your least recent experience last. On the left, you'll have the organization that you worked for, the position that you have there. And then on the right, you'll have the location and the time period that you worked there. If you're having trouble fitting it online, you can abbreviate, you can play around a bit. There is a lot of flexibility here. Ultimately, you want it to look consistent. And if you had multiple roles at one organization, say, summer 2018, you were a communications intern, then you would list that under, the same experience. If in summer 2017, you were a policy intern, they'd both be under the same organization, but you would, list them separately and describe the different stuff that you did in each role on its own. So to go on, So here's an example of someone who worked at Jasco Pacific for 2 different summers. One summer they were a mechanical intern, the other summer they were a structural intern. And you can see in each of these, they sum up the time that they worked there. They describe, the differences between these roles. Even though it's in the same organization, they had very different responsibilities and very different accomplishments. So even though it was at the same organization, you could tell that, they went through a lot of professional development during these 2 years. And then it shows like a narrative of like, okay, one summer they did this, next summer they did that, going along this path towards, to develop engineering experience. So big thing is how to nail these bullet points, because you don't have a lot of them. And, each one of these experiences are things that are important, that have given you a lot of skills. So you want to make sure that you tell a concise story about what you did and the impact it made. Impact is sort of a vague term, but it's really important. And it's like, it kind of sums up the influence that this experience had on your professional development, about the skills that you got away from it, the things that you accomplished that ultimately like guides you along your career path. Somewhat of a weird, washy term, but it is really important. And you can like describe your impact by describing the context of the work that you were doing within the organization, the impact that you did through your accomplishments, how you were able to make a difference there, and then ultimately what you accomplished there, like what your takeaways were and how you were able to influence the organization during your time there. You want to always start each bullet point with an action verb, which are like descriptive, active verbs that really sum up a lot of stuff by using them. Instead of saying, you led a project, you could say that you directed and coordinated, managed, all these words that really sum up a lot of work. And then ultimately you put it together by, this bullet point is great, use an active verb, they quantify it by using this number, they with 700 plus product catalogs. And then they describe what they used Adobe Photoshop. Ultimately, it's a really descriptive term. It's easy for us to understand that the work they did and the impact that it had on the organization, and ultimately their takeaways that they gained, organization skills, they gained familiarity with Photoshop, and by accomplishing this. So a good thing to do is just to brainstorm all of your past experiences. If you're like, okay, I have a lot of things I want to include on my resume, I think they've helped me a lot, don't know how to group them together, start by just describing them and breaking them up into bullet points on a big list, and then you can start transferring them over onto your resume and grouping together in relevant sections. So this is actually from one of my favorite resumes on the resume tip sheet, because this section header makes it really clear that this person is applying for a refugee advocacy position. And within this section, they include both an experience tutoring for Bright, which is, a club on campus. It's not an internship, but it's something that important volunteer position, as well as some past internship experiences. And if they had just listed internship experiences and club experiences, they wouldn't have listed this all together. But, by having a refugee advocacy section instead, they're able to list all the most relevant experiences first and pair them well together in a way that tells a story about how, they were involved with Bright for what I assume is most of their time at Brown. And then in the meantime, they did all these great internships that gave them, important administrative and organizational experience with refugee advocacy, while establishing this long-term individualized relationship with a 9-year-old Eritrean refugee. So it just tells a lot about the reason why they're applying for this job, as well as their experience in this area. I think they do a really good job of doing that. So big takeaways for resume. The first thing is not to stress too much. Sometimes resumes can seem like these overly complex documents that have to sum up every single thing that you've done, but they really don't. It's really just one page that's a good snapshot of everything you've done, and hopefully it's enough to get, spike their interest. They'll invite you to interview, and you can really go into more depth then. Or you can flesh out a lot more things in your cover letter and describe the impact of these experiences even more, instead of just in bullet points. So really with your resume, you just want to sum up everything in a way that's concise and will lead to later discussion of your professional development later.
And Katie, I want to be conscious of time. There are some, I'm going to work on now getting these slides to you. So please stay in the chat for just one extra second.
Mhm.
But we have reached our 3:30 mark. So here, can you run through some of these resources?
Yeah.
Um,
So in the previous slides, there was just kind of troubleshooting stuff, which, these resumes are tough, and especially the first time around, it might not be the most straightforward thing. But PCAs are here to help you. We're here all semester. And if you ever need any help, either with your resume or with your cover letters, or just with helping prepare for an interview, searching for an internship, send it all to Career Lab. Actually, no, I think there's a new email now.
yes, there should be. It's I'll send that in the chat as well. Here we go.
Great. Yeah,
It's
so send it to us. If coming away from this, you still have a lot of questions and you wanted us to look over your resume, you can email it to the PCA email, the Peer Career Advisors at brown.edu email, and we'd be happy to look it over if you still have questions after this.
if you give me 1 second, I'll be able to share these with everybody. A link, copy link.
And yeah, I mean, this presentation is great. It sums up a lot of what you need to know as you start going through your resume. But your resume is something that changes as you gain professional experience, as you apply to different positions. It's something that's like living and growing with you. And we're here to help along the way.
Yeah, just like Katie said, please feel free to send any troubles that you have, any questions, any resumes you want us to look at to that email that I just sent into the chat. And the presentation can be viewed at the link that I also just sent to the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. It was great, and I'm excited to start working with you on your resumes.
Yeah, best of luck, everyone. Thanks for coming.